Well, I want to say thank you to Kenny also and to Annie and their vision. Certainly, as you'll see here, their request when they came to us has stimulated a lot of ideas in our shop, and I appreciated seeing the kind of the ideas that are circulating through all the different universities involved, and maybe this will lead to collaboration and additional ideas in the future. So it's a wonderful thing. Before I get into my presentation, and Dr. Rusk or whoever, I wonder if maybe you could see if you could dim the lights up here a little bit. I just want to say I appreciate the input of my co-authors here, Sarah Lenine, Dylan Sparks, Adam McGee, Elisa Rippey, and Dr. Rusk. The students have worked hard on this parts of this presentation, as well as some of the work that you're going to see that's been done. And like Dr. Kloppenstein said yesterday, when I say we've done this, for the most part I've sat behind the wheel of a car or at a desk, and they've done it. So I do appreciate that, and appreciate all their input into the things that we're going to talk about here this morning. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit different presentation, of course, obviously, than you heard yesterday. I appreciated the gentleman that got on the airplane at 4 o'clock yesterday morning from North Carolina, because he kind of brought to light the regional differences that exist. And that's probably going to come out pretty obviously, or very obviously in my presentation here, as we talk about the potential of semi-confinement systems in Oklahoma. And really my presentation is going to be more about adopting technology in the cow-calf segment, and particularly semi-confinement systems. And so relative to this topic of adopting technology, this is a picture of some of my previous graduate students. I tried to find a picture of my current grad students, but the only ones I could find, they were pictures I have of them, they were out drinking, so I didn't think maybe that was appropriate. But so anyway, these are some of the graduate students, and I am a recent adopter of texting technology. Some of you older folks in the room may still not have made that transition. You need to, except for when you're driving, but you need to try to do that. It's an excellent way to communicate. It took me quite a while to come around. And about 2 years ago, actually, was about the first time I started doing that. And I was really slow. I'm a slow typer to begin with. And when you put yourself on a little bitty keypad, it's that much more difficult. But one day, about 2 years ago, I was sitting in the Atlanta airport. And I thought, you know what, this would be a great opportunity. I was kind of people watching, and Dr. Sawyer either watching some of the younger people modify or adjust the mechanical appendages on their face, or sitting there looking at their phone and doing something this. And so I thought, well, it'd be a good opportunity to practice. And so I just texted something to all of my previous grad students and my current graduate students. I pulled them all up, included them on that text, and I sent them this thought right here. When I'd gotten on the plane that morning, I thought, boy, I feel tall on these airplanes. So I just texted all my grad students. I said, airplanes make me feel tall. And I didn't know what to expect. Turns out they're pretty good at this. Within about 2 minutes, my pants started to vibrate. And it was because my phone was on silent, but it was on vibrate. One says, they make me feel fat. Another one said, OSU research pickups make me feel like a redneck. And then one guy says, and this was one of the guys, I kind of hate to admit it, but he says, ice cream gives me the runs. I'm like, well, that's just wrong. And then there was a little bit of a delay, and about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes later, I get this one. Okay, so bear with me. After brief literature review, your phenotypic characteristics are top 40% of American adult male population for height 5'11", and bottom 16% for adult male weight at 165 pounds. At your age, environmental factors have little to no impact on physical or behavioral characteristics. Summary and conclusions. In cattle buyers' terminology, you would be classified as wormy, tight-hided, trim-middled, poor-doing kind. Riding on an airplane is not going to change that. So, she's an academician, actually, so as you can tell. So as we talk about adopting technology, I just want to give you a quick overview of Oklahoma agriculture as we consider semi-confinement systems or opportunities in our region. A lot of this will apply to our Texas neighbors to the south as well. But if we just look at Oklahoma, you can tell from the rank here, cattle and calves are by far and away the number one agricultural commodity at about $2 billion average value. And this is 2008 through 2010. And this one, the next slide, did not include 2011 and 12 because of the extreme conditions of the drought. So this would be more or closer to what I would consider an average. Winter wheat ranks fourth. A lot of people think of Oklahoma as a wheat state. I didn't mention that poultry and swine production is actually second, poultry's third, wheat comes in fourth, and that's kind of a surprise, I think, to a lot of people. But then all hay comes in at fifth at $489 million average annual value. Corn grain down here at $165 million, and as you can imagine, that is primarily along the top tier of counties through Oklahoma, and then heavy concentration of corn production in the panhandle where we have irrigation. So for most of the state, we just don't have corn, and we just don't have corn stalks, and we have to import most of the corn that's used throughout the state. Grain sorghum, about $50 million worth of production. Okay, so if you look at that a little bit different way here, I've got it. This is the 2007 through 2010, so a 4-year average in million tons. I'm sure this corn grain production here is just I don't know, what is it? Anybody have any idea offhand what it is in Nebraska? 1.2 billion. So I knew that would be a drop in the bucket, and sure enough, compared to 1.2 billion bushels, it is just a drop in the bucket. So. And then corn silage and a little bit of sorghum silage. But you can see, really in the southern Great Plains, our corn stalks and distiller's dried grain is hay. I mean, that is the large commodity that we have year in, year out, and obviously we don't have very much of it during a drought. And we didn't have very much of it in 2011 and not a lot of it in 2012. So our perspective is going to be different. And then, of course, on the right-hand column there, I just expressed it in TDN, or energy values for cow use, and it really tells the same story there. All right, so then if we consider using, let's say, a semi-confinement system to maintain cows with grain, generally speaking, during a drought, like Kenny Ing has done for years, we can make a concentrate-type diet work, and we promote that to our producers quite a bit. And we used to promote it a lot when, we had $2 and $3 corn. And we probably never did really have $2 corn in Oklahoma, but certainly $2.75 to $3.50 when I arrived in this state. But right now, this year, if you look at the U.S. Drought Monitor map, we're in pretty good shape throughout the eastern two-thirds of the state of Oklahoma. We have hay running out of our ears after 2 years of drought and the lowest hay inventory since 1957. 1 year, we have hay everywhere. Okay, now a lot of that's going to get shipped to Texas and into New Mexico and Colorado and western Nebraska and western Kansas. Last 2 years, it was going the other direction. But so if you just consider this break-even, this is break-even that Elisa calculated. If you consider, the last 2 years of drought, and we could have brought corn into Oklahoma most of the time for somewhere, our basis is pretty large in the middle of the state of Oklahoma. It would have been $6.50 to $7.50 a bushel, but we could have afforded to pay $125, $130 for low-quality hay and what we consider nice quality grass hay, we still could have afforded to pay $140 and $150. And there was a lot of that going on. But some cases, hay would not have been available for less than $175 a ton. And in those cases, at least as an intervention strategy for the drought, that made a lot of sense. $6.50 to $7.50 corn made a lot of sense. This year, our hay is worth, I checked on the Oklahoma Ag Marketing Services before we came up here, and you can buy about all the low quality prairie hay you want for $65 to $75 a ton. You can also buy, that is if you don't have to freight it very far, you can also buy pretty nice quality hay for $80 to $90 a ton. Prairie hay, Bermuda grass hay, and so on. And so in order for that to work, corn grain has still got to come down somewhere. Right now we're looking at delivered grain into central part of Oklahoma for about $6.50 a bushel, if you consider our basis. And so it's still, hay is a bargain this year in the central part of the state, and that would change as you go west. All right, so then I'm gonna go through a few of these technologies that I think are appropriate and something we should consider, and the cow-calf segment of the industry has passed on, for the most part, on almost all of these technologies. And we'll just start out with ionophores. That's one of the topics that they gave me to discuss, and we've done a little bit of work in this area recently and have continued to do that because I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Okay, so this is Austin Sexton's master's research, and he just looked at one component of his experiment, and this was a pen basis study in a semi-confinement situation, Kenny. He looked at 12 head cow pens and used pen as the experimental unit, and what he discovered here was that by feeding rumensin during gestation, this is a control supplement, rumensin supplement, 200 milligrams per day, he got a half a pound a day bump in cow performance, got a nice little increase in body condition score in about a 52-day study. So that, I'll tell you, when we saw those results, it reinvigorated our interest in including an ionophore in a cow diet. Why? And it's certainly from an extension standpoint. This is 2004 data. I stole this slide from Dr. Doug Hufstetler when he gave his presentation down at the, PNC, thank you, Plains Nutrition Council or Conference. But this is the cow adoption rate in 2004, and it's the most recent survey data that I could find for cows. And of course, what is the adoption rate of rumensin in the feed yard? Dave, what is it?
Close to
100%, yeah. Well, 99 plus, right? So the cattle feeding industry has been using this technology for what, maybe 30 years, 30 plus years, and for good reason. The cow-calf industry has ignored it. So let's just take a look and see if we should continue to ignore it. This is the FDA approvals for monensin, and that is the only ionophore approved for use in mature cows at this point in time. And there is an FDA approval for mature reproducing beef cows, and the two indications are prevention of coccidiosis and improved feed efficiency. So that's pretty cut and dried. Somebody convinced the folks at FDA, and I actually got to make a visit to FDA this spring to talk about an issue, and I was thoroughly impressed with their level of, well, we'll just say thoroughness. They're a very thorough group. Okay, and so somebody was able to convince them that rumensin deserved a clearance for feed efficiency in mature cows, and this, of course, was several years ago. Now, there's also an approval for dairy cows, and interestingly enough, of course, the indication is for increased milk production efficiency. So then, if you just look at the mode of action, And this is just a review for this group. I'm not going to learn anything new here, but all the improved efficiency can be attributed to altered VFA proportions, primarily an increase in propionate and a reduction in acetate. Not much change really in butyrate, maybe just a slight increase. Decreased methane production, so it inhibits methanogenesis. Improved nitrogen metabolism, reduced proteolysis and deamination. Most people can call that the protein sparing effect. And then retardation on a concentrate diet of feedlot disorders such as lactic acid and bloat. Okay, so then the graduate students asked the question, well, if that's the case on concentrate diet, the mode of action, what happens when we're talking about a forage-based diet? And is there enough evidence there to suggest that we ought to be considering rumensin in a cow-calf system, whether it's semi-confinement or grazing? And so, does rumensin consistently increase propionate in forage-fed animals? Without a doubt, the answer is yes. Those shifts in volatile fatty acid take place much like they do in a concentrate diet, probably not to the degree. In 12 studies that Sarah and Dylan came up with of cows, these are all cow studies, and they're all consuming low to moderate quality forage diets. 9 of those 12 studies, there was a statistically significant greater propionate concentration in the monensin-fed animals. In 12 of those, in other words, 3 of those experiments had an increase, but it was not statistically different. Those of us who like to talk about those anyway, call them numerical differences, okay? So 12 of the 12 headed in the right direction. So to me, that's pretty profound proof that that ionophore is creating those changes in the rumen microenvironment just like you would expect it to. Okay, so these are ruminant animals. If monensin creates that change in a growing calf, if it now I wouldn't necessarily forage-fed or grazing calf, a dairy cow, you would think that it might also have the opportunity to do that in a beef cow. So let's take a quick look at the energetic efficiency then and try to break this down just a little bit more. If you look at the kcals per mole metabolized, glucose at 100%, propionate would be 109%, and acetate 62%. So voila, you see why it's used by 99+% of the feed yards in the country. That shift is the equivalent to, and in these, well, I guess maybe my next slide shows that. But these are 9 of those studies that show the unit increase in propionate, and these are molar increases. So an average of 5.5 molar increase, an average of 4.4 molar reduction in acetate. Okay, and so you combine that information with that information there, and what you wind up with is the equivalent of feeding about 1.4 pounds of corn every day to a cow when you supplement monensin. Now, what does rumensin cost? 200 milligrams. Somebody in here's got to know. About 2.5 cents. In its cheapest form. We could find ways to deliver it and spend 7, 8, 9 cents a day. About 2.5 cents. So what's 1.4 pounds of corn worth a day? Well, it's worth a lot more than 2.5 cents, right? So the other interesting thing I discovered yesterday is apparently we have a lot better corn in Oklahoma than they have up here in Nebraska. It's degraded all the way down to 83% TDN. Terry, we need to compare notes, so maybe I need to send you some Oklahoma corn. But it has really gone down over the years. So Deke told me not to throw him under the bus, but he suggested that I mention that today. So I did. Does Does a shift in VFA and other effects result in improved cow or calf performance? I mean, that's the obvious question, and that's what people are going to want to see, is changes in animal performance. And unfortunately, the answer is not as clear as when you look at the metabolism data. In what she got there, 6 studies, 4 of those 6 experiments show an improvement of some type in animal performance, whether it's reducing intake, thereby increasing efficiency because performance was not negatively impacted, increase in body condition score, increase in gain, body condition score, and lower intake in this particular experiment, and then Austin's study that I showed you earlier, increase in weight gain. So 4 of those 6 experiments, there's a positive impact. Not as clear in lactation, maybe a little grayer yet. Here we've got, 4 positive studies and 4 with no positive impact or no difference, and actually 1 with a reduction in calf weaning weight. But of all these experiments, that's the only one that we found an actual negative impact in terms of performance. Okay, so to wrap that up, I think in general, number one, it's difficult to design an experiment, particularly during lactation, or if you encompass late gestation and lactation, it's difficult to design an experiment to very accurately measure differences, if it's a small percentage of their performance, it's going to be difficult to come up with a study where you can demonstrate that difference. And so that's probably part of the challenges here. We weeded out some studies that had low numbers of experimental units and so on and so forth. But when you get right down to it, I do think that if you consider the dairy clearance, the FDA beef cow efficiency clearance, you consider this body of literature and the fundamental change that is occurring in the rumen, I think we really need to take another look at incorporating rumensin in beef cow programs. And it makes a lot of sense to me if we're talking about a semi-confinement. Those early studies suggest about 10% reduction in intake and similar animal performance. And so, last 2 years, that was 10% less $150 to $175 hay that you had to purchase. And that would have been worth a lot. Okay, so another technology that we've looked at is just very simply improving hay use efficiency by not wasting it. Dr. Dan Buskirk at Michigan State did some of this early on. His paper's been published for a long time now in the Journal of Animal Science. And it's one of the most popularly read papers in the journal. So let me ask that question right now. How many of you have a hay feeder? If you, whatever your attachment to beef cattle operations, so how many of you have a hay feeder? Raise your hands, please. Okay, good. It's not quite as high a percentage as I thought it might be, but in most of the cow-calf groups that I speak to in Oklahoma, 90+% of them are going to raise their hands. So it touches a lot of people. But here he just showed the difference in hay waste from 3.5% with that cone, and we'd call that a skirt or a metal sheet around the bottom, and then a standard hay feeder with a sheet around the bottom at about 6% waste, 11%, and then about 15% with that style of hay feeder. And so we designed an experiment. Austin, when he'd finished his first project, and he asked the question, he said, could we look at hay feeders that are most popular in Oklahoma and just compare them head to head? I said, well, I think that's a good idea. And so that's what he did. So let me just show you that real quick. This is what I'd call a standard ag shop feeder. And I think I built probably 15 or 20 of these when I was in high school. But the features of this one, he calls it the open bottom steel ring, costs about $100, maybe $125 now, $150, weighs about 100 pounds, so it's convenient. It's easy to pick up and roll over to another bale of hay and drop it on there. and so on, but it has an open bottom. You'd expect it to result in more hay waste. 6 feeding stations. This is the second most popular feeder in Oklahoma, according to his survey. It's a 2-inch poly pipe, standard open bottom ring. He calls it the polyethylene pipe feeder. It was a little more expensive at $209. Still weighs about 100 pounds. And so very popular because it's a little less indestructible, more indestructible by the bull, but yet it's still very convenient. Open bottom, it's got 6 feeding stations. Okay, now this, as is spreading across the state of Oklahoma now, Kenny, this is now known as the Kenny-Ing skirt because it's got this metal skirt around the bottom, and of course Kenny's project kind of stimulated some of these and have supported this line of research. Closest. Okay. So sheeted bottom steel ring is what the way he titled that, I guess. It costs a little more. It's a good quality feeder made out of heavy metal, and it costs about $300, and it weighs quite a bit more. It's not as convenient to move. Metal apron, skirt, 16 feeding stations in that one. It's got those nice bent feeding stations, kind of encourage those cows to keep their head in the feeder. All right, and then this one is one that John Deere actually recommended that we try, and some work that we were doing for them, and so we use it. This is what we call the modified cone, and you can see the kind of the modified cone structure up here, and depending on how big your bale is, it might or might not hold that bale up off of the ground when you first drop it in there. And then of course it also incorporates the feature of that skirt or steel apron around the bottom. It's quite a bit more expensive at $525, weighs about 300 pounds. It's not convenient to move around by hand. 9 feeding stations. You'd probably rather have a front end loader to drop a bale in this. You can get a bale in it with the Dewey's, but it's a little bit tricky. All right, so just to kind of cut to the chase, these are Austin's results, and I'm just going to focus on this bottom line here. And what he found is that in the open bottom styles of feeders, we had 20 to 21% hay waste. And when you're feeding in a dry lot or out in the pasture, it just really blew my mind. I had no idea that we would discover this much hay waste, because our producers go to all the trouble of, spraying herbicide on their hay meadows, and you got to go in there and mow it, rake it, bale it. I don't know about you, but that cost me $30 a bale this year to get that done. And then you move it to a storage area, and you pack it back out to a feeding area somewhere. And then at that point, then waste 21% of it? I mean, I think that kind of management was probably facilitated by this $2 or $3 corn world that we used to live in. And we've been talking about for 2 days that the cow-calf segment of the industry can't afford that anymore. And so it's something to consider. And it was kind of a shock to me. Now, the Michigan State data wasn't near that high in waste. They fed a lot nicer quality hay, may have had something to do with stocking rate, and so on and so forth. But our hay waste is consistently, especially with these lower end feeders, has consistently been much higher than that. But Kenny, your skirt was worth about 8%. So just by putting a skirt on one of those open bottom steel rings, or open bottom feeders, we saved 8%. And so we've been encouraging people in our state, if you don't do anything else, find a way to get a bottom around your hay feeder. And you can save a lot of hay and reduce the amount you have to put up in the summer and inventory for the winter and so on. It's as simple as that. And people are pretty creative. They'll figure out ways to do that. And then if you combine some sort of a cone mechanism with an apron or skirt around the bottom, you drop it another 8%. And the studies we've done with other cone-style feeders, we wind up with very consistently right around 5 to 6% waste. They work. They're not convenient. They're not inexpensive, but they work really well as far as conserving hay. All right, so just some quick pictures. We'll roll through these pretty quick, but this is our little facility. We've got 30-foot by 40-foot concrete pads, and we clean that pad off and put the bale feeder in the middle of it, put the bale in it, take the strings off, and turn the cows loose. The students come back every 24 hours and rake up all the hay that's outside of the feeder. We divide it into piles. I won't go into that, but weigh it on an electronic scale, so we know exactly the weight of the hay that goes in. We think we know as close as possible to the amount of hay that's wasted, so we can also calculate dry matter intake. Because at the end of about a 4-day period or 3-day period, depending on the stocking rate, we clean out the orts, weigh them back, and so then we have a really good idea of how much was consumed and how much was wasted. All right, so this is hour 0. There's hour 24. That pad hasn't been cleaned, but you can see a little bit of hay has made its way out to the outside of that pad. This is hour 48. Remember that pad's getting cleaned off, swept and everything every 24 hours. So this is new waste. Hour 72, you're still seeing quite a bit of waste, maybe even a little bit more out here. And the interesting thing about this feeder is it appears like when the hay drops below the cone mechanism there, the waste actually tends to go up just a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. All right, this is my ag shop feeder. Open bottom steel ring, hour 0. There's hour 24. Hour 48. 72. And this is recurring every day. Okay, so you can see how you can get to 21%. Hour 96. And I think to myself, that was a plain suggestion he had for this experiment. But then I drive home for Christmas into Kansas, and I go by farm after farm, after farm after farm where you see this. It's rampant throughout our industry. Here's the poly feeder, hour 0, 24, 48, that really doesn't look too bad. 72, and 96. All right, so here's the Kenny Ing skirt, hour 0, and it's going to be in between. It's going to be moderate, as you can expect. And I think in this particular picture series, he didn't get quite as a nice looking bale of hay there, but substantial amount of hay waste. All right, so let me move on to another idea then. Thanks to some of the northern states, University of Minnesota in this data set, it was also apparent that if you could limit access to hay, you could cut back on that waste some. And we might even be able to feed forage and get into a system where Kenny said yesterday, you limit their intake. And if you limit their intake, you should be able to improve digestibility of that feed resource. And that's kind of what 3 of these experiments that have previously been published suggested. And these were, this one is a more recent one. The other ones were published in the 80s. Okay, so it's been around, the idea has been around for a while, but really not utilized, as far as I know, in forage-fed animals to a great extent. And so Dylan Sparks came along and he suggested that we look at stacking technologies. And so very quickly what he did was he stacked, this is a standard treatment with 24/7 access to hay, a typical hay feeder, and the last 2 years we didn't think we could afford to use the ag shop feeder. All right, so we went with the Kenny Ing skirt, the yellow one, and used it. So that's the data you're going to see is not the extreme. You're going to see the separation from the middle to the technology group, or the most Cadillac program, if you will. So the technology he used was 7-hour access to the hay, a modified cone, which is the Bextra feeders you just saw, and then 200 milligrams of rumensin in the supplement, which was fed daily. All right, so this is the standard, picture of the standard. And I want to mention here that the data you're going to see, the waste on this yellow feeder, let's see, this was last fall, right? This was last fall. We harvested this hay in 2012, and it was dry, and it was really low quality. Maybe some of the poorest quality prairie hay we've put up after 2 years of extreme drought and stress on those hay meadows. It was really dry. And I don't know, what how to explain it exactly, but we had a lot more waste with this really dry material that we put up in the drought. The particle size was smaller because it was shorter hay. The yield was about 1/3 of the long-term average, and it was probably 90 to 91% dry matter. But a lot of waste. And so that's just a picture. I think this picture was taken 24 hours after that bale was put in there. And so you see all the waste after that, those pads have been cleaned 24 hours previous. All right, and then his technology group, much different story. Here you see the way we chose to limit access. We just built a welded wire panel around that 30 by 40 concrete pad. We didn't spend very much money. We just unwired it and opened the gate, let the cows in at the right time, and when the time came to turn them out, we'd shove them out, shut the gate, and wire it closed. Okay, so as simple as that. So a big difference just visually. You can walk out there from one pen to the next and you're just like, wow. It's pretty amazing. So here's his data. Maybe the most interesting thing is that from restricting these cows, Kenny, to only 7 hours access of hay, we've got no difference in cow weight change. No difference. It's slightly positive to the technology group, but there's no difference there. Hay waste 25% with that yellow feeder. The previous year, in those other studies, it was 13%. There's a big difference in hay from year to year. And so it was really high that year, and 12% waste with the technology group, and that was disappointing. We had hoped it would not be that high in the technology group. But bottom line was we had a net hay disappearance or savings of hay of 18% by combining those three technologies. All right, and then so the next thing we talked about, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do next? Should we repeat that? Should we do something else? And he said, well, how about we just stack on another technology? And so we decided to include anhydrous ammonia in that technology treatment, ammoniating that hay. And that's just a real quick kind of review. I'm not going to take the time to review the literature, but for the most part, there's quite a bit of literature published on this. And this, I think, is the big one, and that's 8 to 15 percentage units increase in digestibility. And if you're talking about limit feeding animals, that's a big deal. You can really cut back on the amount of forage you need or the time you need to give them access to forage if you can improve digestibility that much. Increase in intake by 15 to 20%. Well, in this case, we're not going to take advantage of that because we're going to limit their access. Challenges for ammoniation, labor. I used to think this was a big deal. Anymore, I really don't think it's that big of a deal. Ammoniating hay, it didn't take us but a couple of hours to ammoniate a stack of 72 1,400-pound bales. We're not very good at it. We don't do it very often. The guys in southwest Missouri that make a living doing this can ammoniate a stack of hay, at least get the injection started in about 30 minutes. Okay, they're really good at it. And in the United States, those people in southwest Missouri have got it down to a science. Materials and equipment. Well, it used to be a bigger deal than it is today. Most of these guys have equipment that makes this a much simpler process. I'm talking about front-end loaders and skid steer loaders and things like that. This is probably the big one in terms of limiting the adoption of this technology, and that is access to anhydrous. You know, if you go to eastern Oklahoma, most of our people don't have access to anhydrous. Western half of the state, they do. And so, but we're seeing a lot of it going on even this year throughout western Oklahoma. Dylan estimated the cost in the summer of 2013 was about $25 per ton of roughage ammoniated, and that I think is a 2.5% rate. All right, so a lot of people prefer this 4x3 configuration. The wind blows in Oklahoma occasionally. I don't know if you've heard about that, but the rain settling in these crevices on the top is actually an advantage because it holds it down, it keeps it tight, and so that's a good thing, and that's the producers say that they like that better than they do a 3x2x1 configuration for that reason. And here's just a lot of guys are actually stacking up straw or low-quality prairie hay or late summer baled grass hay in the edge of their wheat field where they've got a ready access to a material that they can use to create an airtight seal around the edge of that. Use a skid steer front-end loader, just roll that plastic down the top, drop it over the sides, seal around it in about an hour maybe for most people. And it's just not all that difficult. Okay, so here's Dylan's latest experiment. He's just kind of wrapping this up right now, doing the lab work on digestibility. But this is the same standard treatment with 24 access, typical hay feeder, the Kenny skirt, no feed additive technology. It was 6 hours access to ammoniated hay. We dropped it to 6 because we expected the increase in digestibility. And so we thought that might be about right. And then we used the modified cone, 200 milligrams of rumensin. And here are the results from that most recent study. Again, he's got a trend for lower cow. Oh, these are, I should mention, these are fall calving cows, and so they're nursing calves. They're on one of these two treatments, which is that really low quality prairie hay that I talked about. In lactation, they're only getting a little bit of a protein supplement. So we expected them to lose weight, and certainly they did. There's a trend for this technology group to lose a little bit more weight. Hay waste, though, dramatic difference, 22% versus 7%. And the bottom line here is we had 31% reduction in hay use by combining those four technologies. So I think there's opportunity here, and we're going to keep looking into this. If you're talking about a semi-confinement system in a part of the world where your corn stalks and distillers' grains is in the form of hay, which is really what it is in our part of the world, I think there's some opportunity because we had gotten used to managing cattle in those systems like we had $2 and $3 corn. Everything was cheap. And that's not the case anymore. So kind of in conclusion then, there's no question in our mind that forage feeding efficiency can be improved. It needs to be improved. Again, if you drive around the country, you can see the waste that occurs. Semi-confinement offers opportunity to implement additional technologies, in particular limited access. Anybody can use an ionophore, out on grass, but in a semi-confinement system, it just makes it simpler to put all those technologies together and take advantage of them. Minuteson supplementation makes sense for beef cows and semi-confinement management systems. Again, I think the cow-calf industry just kind of said no thanks. We're scared of killing horses is generally, I think, the problem. And so I think we need to take another look at that. Ammoniation is a real opportunity for some. And if we can combine those technologies, as Dylan has demonstrated, there's opportunity to cut that down as much as 31%. So thank you again. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and bring the students and have them interact with you all and learn from the other universities. And this has been a wonderful event. Dr. Rusk, I'm going to sit down. Thank you very much.